Hello, my name's Steve Haynes and I'm the co-author of this book, How to Go to Work, the honest advice no one ever tells you at the start of your career. We had to learn so much the hard way about making that move from university to the world of work. So we decided to collect together all of the insight from over 100 employers that we spoke to, from an ethical supply chain consultant to an architect to a brain surgeon, to be able to gather this together for you. These are the essential tools and tips that will help you become more productive in work, manage those challenging situations that arise, prepare really well for your first day, your first week, and the first 3 months in a role, so you make a great start in the world of work. And we put together this series of bite-sized videos for Leeds careers to help you navigate those first steps. So in this session, we'll be covering something that's very new in the world of work, which is hybrid working. Now, for a long time, people have been working remotely. In fact, at the start of my career, I was working on very different locations and sites. I then moved into an international job just around about the time that video conferencing became a bit more widely accessible. And so there's been a certain element to working remotely that's been changing over the past few decades. But the impact of lockdown on how so many of us worked meant that so many businesses adopted hybrid working or remote working in some cases as the norm. And we're all starting to learn our way through this different way of working. Our technology is improving to be able to support this, but it isn't necessarily the case that we have the right skills to be able to survive the hybrid workplace. This can be particularly challenging at the start of your career. So much of those first few days in work, those first few weeks, whether you are working on site specifically as a building contractor or a medical professional, you'll be learning the rules and the routines of that particular space. But so too for offices. You'd learn by observing what other people do, having those informal chats, being really visible and being able to ask lots of questions to your line manager or whoever's responsible for you in the workplace. Even in self-employment, there was a lot more networking, meeting people, staying in contact, and that was hugely important to be able to build your client list. And we're starting to find this is a bit more challenging. There are very different attitudes to how we should work in a remote way. And there are lots of benefits too. There are lots of things that mean that you can work more flexibly, that you can live in different places, and that you can balance your personal needs, your life, the kinds of things that you require to flourish and to support your well-being by having a bit more of a flexible location in where you work. So what I want to do in this session is just share some of the insights that I've gathered over the past 18 months that have really started to explore what makes for a good way of hybrid working. We'll cover a bit about understanding you and how you like to work and how you can effectively set your boundaries. We'll understand a bit about how other people perceive hybrid working and why it matters to you, how you can build the right working environment to work in. We'll be looking a bit about how to stay visible to your boss. This is so important, and to your team as well, and to your superiors, to be able to still enjoy being part of a culture, of a workplace, whilst also having the benefits of being able to get a job done in a really engaged and supported way that you would normally get in an office space, but perhaps without some of the problems of having to commute in or to make some compromises in how you organised your life. So setting boundaries is going to be hugely important, but so is staying visible. We'll also do a little bit about understanding how to present in a hybrid environment. You can see me recording this video on my laptop in front of my bookcase. I've set this scene up to be able to be effective and accessible as possible for you. How can you do that in whatever your working environment is? And the last thing I just want to touch on is when being in person still matters, and how to choose what kind of meeting when to be able to get the right kind of outcome that you want in the workplace. One of the earlier videos I did was on productivity, and this plays out in a very different way in the hybrid workplace. So it's really important to think, how can I get the best out of this interaction, either working remotely or being there in person? And how should I choose how to do that? Okay, let's get started. What I want you to do is get a blank piece of paper or open a screen or maybe even just some notes on your phone and start to map out the pros and cons of working remotely and working in the office for you. You can do this by drawing two circles that cross over in the middle like a Venn diagram, and dividing a line through the middle of those circles. And I want you to put the remote pros and the remote cons in one circle, and the in-person pros and the in-person cons in another circle, and then start to consider the bit in the middle where hybrid working works best for you. What might be some good examples of this? Well, you could think, okay, a pro of remote working is I don't have to commute. I used to spend 2 hours a day at one point in my career, 3 hours a day, simply getting into and back home from the office. It cost money. It wasn't always a very pleasant experience if I was having to stand on transport or get stuck in traffic. So think about, there could be some real pros about how you can organize your time. There might be some cons as well. Maybe if you're in the workplace for the first time, you won't get to know your team members that well. You might have the opportunities to socialize as much. People have changed their behaviors hugely around offices, and it's having a big effect on its culture. In terms of in-person, well, some of the pros might be that you get to have all of those small interactions with your colleagues and learn a bit more about the work. In fact, if you're doing a job that excites you, and I really hope you are, then you'll get the opportunity to get more involved with the coalface of the work that you're doing. Maybe you'll be out on the shop floor or in the research and development department finding out about the latest that's happening in your industry. Some of the cons of hybrid working as well can be that you won't necessarily have the opportunity to engage with people in the way that you want to, but there's real benefits too. You'll be able to work at home in a flexible, more supportive way. But then if you think about the cons of in-person, think about all of that time that was wasted so often in the office. Maybe you're making endless rounds of cups of tea, or maybe you can never find a meeting room. That still seems to be the case every time I go into the office. So you'll get a really big picture of what matters to you and how you like to navigate the workplace. When you go into your new role, there may be certain policies and procedures. Where I work, we have what we call anchor day, which is the day you're supposed to be in the office, and then a second day where we can make sure that everybody has a desk space if we go in on certain days, but there's flexibility around that. Start to find out what works best for you and compare it to the kind of workplace policies that you are going to be expected to work with. So really get a sense of when's remote good, when's in person good, and how are you going to navigate that hybrid? You'll be able to think, if you have a 5-day-a-week job, what kind of days you'd like to be in the office. You'd be able to think about your money and the cost of commuting in by balancing when you need to be about. You'll be able to think about structuring your week so that you have certain amounts of time in the office and certain amounts of time working remotely. There was a lot of talk a few years ago about a thing called deep work. This was the idea that you could spend a long period of uninterrupted time really immersed in a topic. And that's particularly relevant in careers like being a research scientist or being a policy advisor. You might need big chunks of time where you can really focus on your work. So what you'll be able to do is plan where you're going to be alongside what you're going to be doing when. And that's a really productive way to organize yourself. Second thing to bear in mind is there's a really big difference of opinion around hybrid working. And there was some polling on this, which was quite revealing. It tends to be that where people are at the very start of their career and they don't necessarily have caring responsibilities, they might have shared accommodation that they're living in, that actually going into the office was seen as broadly a pretty good thing. The flexibility was welcome, but often you've got a lot of people who want to be in the office and want to interact. At the other end of the spectrum, actually, people later on in their career, perhaps when their children have grown up and left home and they don't necessarily have that much to maintain in their home life, like to be in the office too. Remember that a lot of people learnt about management and leadership by being in the office. There was a big trend a few years back called the 1-minute manager, the idea that you could just meet people in the office space and do this managing of their workloads or having the conversations to refine the work in tiny little pockets. That's so much harder when we're working remotely. There are people too who perhaps have young children or have long commutes into work who really relish the opportunity of taking on hybrid as a way of working remotely. When you go into the workplace, you'll have so many people thinking in these different ways, and you won't always be able to read the entire picture. Maybe they're trying to encourage a meeting to be online because they know they've got the plumber coming on Wednesday morning. Maybe instead they're really trying to encourage there to be in person because they're feeling a bit anxious about how the project's going and they think it'd be better to get everybody into the room. So remember that when you're putting forward your view of how you'd like to work in the hybrid environment, think too that other people are going to have other pressures around them as well. So good idea to map that out, good idea to get a map of where other people might be coming from, and good idea to present quite early on in understanding what's expected of you and how you would like to work as well. It's really important to negotiate that from the start, and then you can do the next bit. Think about how you're going to build relationships. What kind of relationship do you want with your boss and with your team? Being present's really going to matter sometimes, so use your time effectively. You usually have something like a one-to-one, they often call it, or kind of a person-to-person meeting where you just meet with one other individual. That can be really good online, but sometimes you might want to choose certain occasions where you're having perhaps a bit more of a sensitive conversation, where being in person is slightly better. Make sure that you're structuring those meetings well. They're good opportunities to check in on progress, to get quick bits of confidential feedback, to raise some issues that you're unsure about. Make sure you're preparing the questions that you want to take to go into those meetings. And also when there are those bigger, more structured meetings, large team meetings, or performance reviews where you'll want to be preparing well in advance, think about dividing up your time so you can present really well in those meetings too. Reflect back on your work over the past few weeks. Has it gone well? Where have been the challenges? Think what might be coming up and things that you're particularly concerned about. Take an opportunity to look at the bigger picture and learn what other people are doing. These infrequent get-togethers are a great opportunity to do all of that learning you would have done by being in the same space as others in a more concentrated way if you use it well. There's a lot of talk about being visible. What does this mean? Well, people need to have a certain sense of what you're working on and how you're doing, and are very keen to help. You're going to have to ask a lot more questions than you'd be used to and use that contact time really effectively. Don't forget to book in occasional coffees or conversations, even if they're virtual, with people, and definitely use that time in the office, not just to sit at your desk and do your work. If you have got a bit more flexibility in your time, make sure you're having those informal conversations. Book them in advance if you need to get the time of busy people. Really concentrated use of that in-person time is now more important than ever. We've got a load of tools as well to help us stay visible within the workplace. It's a really good idea to, if you have a calendar, say a calendar in Outlook or in Google, whatever the system you're using in your workplace, to make sure you're clearly labeling how you're using your time. Put meetings in, say what they are and who you're meeting. And that means that anybody else can come and look at a shared calendar if you have one and just check what you're doing when. That helps them schedule time with you, but also get a sense of what you're working on. Use those get-togethers, whether they are remote or in person, to share a bit about what you're doing. Somebody asks you for an update, think beforehand, what would be the key things that you want to share about your week that's gone and the week ahead of you? Maybe some of the issues that are arising. Again, preparation is going to be really key. And the benefit of that is you can use all of that end-to-end flexibility in the day. The last thing I think is really important to bear in mind is about your boundaries. Make sure that you're booking in time where you're having lunch, finishing the day. Indicate that really clearly. Always show when you're taking leave as well, so people know where you are. They're going to be much less reliant on being able to just look around the office and see whether you're there and whether you're busy. So really maintaining all of that information about where you are and what you're doing and reporting that regularly up to your boss is going to help make hybrid working so much easier. Think also about what you're presenting when you're using a screen. It can make the world of work an enormously more accessible experience, but only if you're really well prepared. You can see here I've made sure that I'm lit quite well, that you can hear me clearly. You can use captioning if needed to be able to make it more accessible. All of these things really matter. Make sure you're choosing a place that's well organized and you've got everything you need around you. All of us are in various ways working from a kitchen table and making some compromises by working from home. But most of the time, you should be in a place where you feel you can get involved in your work and you're not too regularly disrupted by what's around you. And that can be a real challenge as well. I know that not everybody has the luxury of being able to live in the kind of environment where you can do that. So it's really important that you get that good conversation going with your manager as well about making sure you've got office space or site space, depending on where you're working, to be able to do your work. Always make sure you have a really good start and end of your day as well. You can use those wonderful productivity tips of planning your day and recapping on your day at the end of it and planning the next one. And if you put in those blocks of time, then you won't find yourself just answering another email or just responding to another request or maybe filling in that form or doing that extra bit of work at the end of the day. You're just tiring yourself out for the next one. And the start of your career can be a really intense experience emotionally and in terms of learning a whole new amount about the environments as well. So make sure you're supporting your well-being and you're getting the rest you need. Always keep checking in on your work, how you're doing, and make sure you're communicating that to other people. Okay, last thing, so I said I'd cover it, is when should you choose a different type of meeting? Well, let's draw this out as a spectrum. On the one hand, look at all the benefits of remote working. One of the great things is when you're fully remote, when you're in that virtual space together, it can be a very inclusive dialogue. You are all framed perfectly and you can all interact with each other in different ways. You can raise your hand on Zoom or Teams or Google Meet, whatever you're using, to indicate that you want to come in and make a point. You can use interactive software sometimes to be able to create ideas together. So in some ways, it can be a very inclusive space to be working in. Similarly, there are important times where in-person thinking together, forming ideas, using breakout groups is a lot easier in person as well. Think about away days or times of getting together on conferences or meeting new clients where actually being together in the shared space can help you pick up on a lot of those non-verbal cues and you can understand the situation a bit more fully. If you're working in the kind of environment where you need to inspect a space, maybe it's a film set or maybe it's a research laboratory, it's going to be really important to be able to get there and walk around. You're never going to quite recreate that picture virtually, at least for now. You've got the opportunity to interact with people and pick up on more cues about their lives and the things that matter to them. And that's going to be really helpful in forming those relationships. So there are distinct times when each is actually very useful. Lastly, thinking about that hybrid working space is hugely important as well. Make sure you've got the right technology in place if you're remote. There's nothing more isolating than when you've got a whole room full of people and you're one of one or two on a screen somewhere, then you're very rarely brought into the conversation. Make sure that you can access or hear or have a transcript of all of the people in the room so you can interact with them as well. And if you're chairing or if somebody else is chairing, make sure you're calling on different parts of the room to make sure that it's a very inclusive conversation. Let's check in on who's on the video. Let's hear that comment from the corner of the room over there. What's happening in this office too? You have to put so much more effort into making sure that you're creating an inclusive and supportive conversation. So hopefully that's a good overview of some of the challenges, some of the opportunities about the world of work. Make sure you are understanding how you like to work and being conscious of how other people work. Use your time really well to ask the questions that you need to get answers to and to get the feedback that will help you thrive in your career. Make sure you remain visible and that you are telling people what you're doing, both in terms of managing your calendar and in regular updates and communications so they can check in on how you're doing. Set yourself up in a really conducive workplace to be able to work remotely effectively, and then choose the right kind of meeting for the right kind of setting as you're starting to navigate this hybrid workplace. You can always access the support of your career service, even after graduation, by creating a My Career account with the university. So do keep gathering all that information. I hope these short videos provide you with some useful tips and tools, some insight about how to start out in the world of work.